Welcome to a journey through time and memory. Before we dive into the depths of a world lost to the fires of history, I want to share that this narrative experience was crafted using advanced AI technology to weave together historical records, cartography, and storytelling in a way never before possible. If you find yourself captivated by the stories of the past and the lessons they hold for our future, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of explorers. Now, let us step back into a world that no longer exists. Rotterdam today is a marvel of the 21st century, a glittering skyline of glass, steel, and avant-garde architecture that screams of the future. But this modern appearance is a mask, a radical break from a past that was violently severed. To walk the streets of contemporary Rotterdam is to walk upon a landscape of absence. In May 1940, the sky over this Dutch harbor city turned black, not with storm clouds, but with the wings of the Luftwaffe. In less than 15 minutes of concentrated aerial bombardment, nearly the entire historic heart of Rotterdam was erased. Centuries of architectural evolution, of narrow gabled houses, of winding medieval alleys, and of brick-lined canals vanished in a whirlwind of fire and dust. What remained was a tabula rasa, a blank slate. Today's Rotterdam is not an evolved city, it is a reconstruction built over a void. To truly understand the soul of this place, one cannot simply look at the skyscrapers. We must look backward, beneath the concrete, into a city defined not by grand monuments or theatrical spectacle, but by the relentless rhythm of movement, the grit of labor, and the ever-present flow of water. It was a city that breathed with the tide, a place where history was written in the wake of ships and the sweat of merchants. How do we enter a world that has been physically deleted? Our portal is a masterpiece of 17th century cartography, the detailed bird's-eye map of 1694-1695, created by the meticulous Johannes de Vaux and the visionary Roman de Hooge. This map is not merely a piece of paper, it is a blueprint of a lost civilization. When we look at it, we aren't just seeing a layout. We are seeing the spatial logic of the Dutch Golden Age. It reveals a city that was dense, functional, and claustrophobically bound to the River Maas. De Vaux and de Hooge didn't just draw buildings, they captured the DNA of Rotterdam. Through their work, we see how trade dictated every alleyway, how governance was tucked into the corners of commerce, and how daily life was a choreography of logistics. This map serves as our silent guide, allowing us to navigate the phantom streets of the 1690s, tracing the shadows of warehouses and the outlines of quays where the world's goods once landed. It is an invitation to inhabit a space where land and river were not separate entities, but partners in a grand, mercantile dance. Rotterdam was never meant to be a static monument, it was born as a point of control. It emerged not from a king's decree or a religious vision, but from the raw necessity of the River Maas. This was the vital corridor, the liquid highway linking the cold depths of the North Sea to the deep, rich interior of the European continent. The river was the city's spine, and the city was its servant. On our 17th century map, the city doesn't just sit near the water, it presses against it with an almost desperate intimacy. Every quay, every warehouse, and every fortification was aligned along the river's edge, revealing a society where the distinction between land and water was blurred. The Maas provided life, but it also demanded respect. The city's very survival depended on its ability to harness the river's power while defending against its temper. This was a place where the air always tasted of salt and silt, and where the horizon was always dominated by the masts of ships, reminding every citizen that they were part of a global circulatory system. Entry into Old Rotterdam was not an act of freedom, it was an act of scrutiny. At the riverfront, strongpoints like the Oude Hoofd stood as sentinels of the city's sovereignty. These were the thresholds, the points of transition where the wild energy of the sea met the ordered world of the city. As a ship approached, the pace changed. Sails were lowered, rhythm slowed, and the heavy eyes of the city's tax collectors and guards fell upon the cargo. This was a space of regulation, a landscape defined by the tension between trade and security. As Rotterdam's ambitions grew, so did its reach. The city didn't just wait for ships. It extended its control downstream, building newer fortifications and transforming the riverfront from a simple checkpoint into a sophisticated, managed zone of oversight. To enter Rotterdam was to acknowledge its power. It was a city that knew exactly what it was worth, and it ensured that every crate of spice, every bolt of silk, and every barrel of grain paid its due to the masters of the mass. In the heart of the old city, commerce was not a spectacle, it was a biological function. It was the air the citizens breathed. The center of this universe was the Bourse, the exchange, where merchants from across the globe gathered. Here, the architecture was secondary to the activity. Within these walls, men negotiated the prices of goods that were still months away at sea. They traded insurance, signed contracts, and most importantly, exchanged information. In 17th century Rotterdam, information was the most valuable commodity, often moving faster than the ships themselves. Just steps away, the vissereimarkt or fish market operated with a different kind of intensity. Here the speed was dictated by the morning sun. Freshness was the only metric that mattered, profit was measured in hours, and hesitation meant total loss. In Rotterdam, trade wasn't confined to grand, decorative buildings. It was embedded in the very stones of the street. It was a constant, practical, and often brutal system that left no room for the sentimental. While the riverfront was the city's engine, the public squares were its heart. The Grote Markt functioned as the ultimate social and economic crossroads, a place where the classes collided. In the shadow of the great church, people gathered not just to buy and sell, but to exist in the collective. Standing tall in this bustle was the statue of Desiderius Erasmus, the great humanist scholar. This was a profound symbolic gesture. The city's intellectual identity was physically merged with its everyday exchange. Erasmus watched over the markets, a silent witness to the fact that Rotterdam was a place of both the hand and the mind. These squares were the internet of their day, hosting rumor, news, political debate, and civic presence. It was here that the population of Rotterdam encountered itself in motion, a sea of faces from every corner of the Dutch Republic and beyond, all unified by the shared pursuit of prosperity and the shared dangers of a life lived on the edge of the water. To understand the scale of Rotterdam's reach, one had to walk along the Boompees. Here stood the East India House, the administrative nerve center of the Dutch East India Company, VOC. This was where the imperial machinery hummed. Asian spices, porcelains, and exotic woods didn't just appear in the city, they were managed, taxed, and distributed through this building. The sheer efficiency of the location was a testament to Rotterdam's pragmatism. The VOC house was positioned in tight proximity to the shipyards and the deepwater harbors. Administration, construction, and transport were linked in a seamless loop. In Rotterdam, wealth didn't manifest in the form of golden palaces or idol monuments. It flowed through systems. The city's authority was quiet, reflected in the stacks of ledger books and the rhythmic thud of the shipbuilder's hammer. It was a global power disguised as a hard-working port town. Power in Rotterdam was decentralized and functional. There were no royal residences here. Instead, there were institutions. The city hall was the site of law and taxation, the boring but essential gears of a functional society. But perhaps the most vital institution was the water authority. In a landscape where the ground beneath your feet was a temporary gift from the sea, the water authority was the ultimate arbiter of life and death. They oversaw the dikes, the drainage, and the sluices. Engineering was not a hobby, it was a survival strategy. Combined with the maritime administration that coordinated naval defense and shipping security, these systems maintained order in a city built on constant movement. It was a government of the pragmatic, for the pragmatic, ensuring that the fragile balance between the rising tide and the growing city was never tipped. Defense in Old Rotterdam was not a task left to a distant king's army, it was a civic responsibility. At the Dolen, the city's citizen militias gathered to train. These were not professional soldiers, but the merchants, craftsmen, and laborers of the city. In this system, the man who sold you cloth in the morning might be the man guarding the city gate at night. This shared burden of defense reinforced a collective identity that was unique to the Dutch merchant cities. It was an identity rooted in participation rather than hierarchy. To live in Rotterdam was to be a stakeholder in its safety. The walls and the cannons were not just stone and iron. They were manifestations of the people's will to protect the wealth and the freedom they had carved out of the mud and the mist. Dominating the entire skyline of the pre-war city was the Laurenskerk, the great church of St. Lawrence. It was the spiritual center and the ultimate civic landmark, its massive tower visible for miles across the flat polder land. When the bombs fell in 1940, the city burned with a heat so intense that steel melted and stones crumbled. But the Laurenskerk, though gutted by fire and stripped of its roof, refused to fall. It stood like a scorched skeleton amidst the smoking ruins of a vanished world. Today, it remains one of the only physical links to the pre-war city. When you stand before it, you are seeing a survivor. It is a bridge between the 17th century map and the 21st century street. Around it, fragments of old street lines and the subtle curves of the river still echo the past, providing a ghostly blueprint for those who know how to look.
This structure represents
The end of Old Rotterdam was not a slow decline. It was a sudden, violent erasure. On May 14, 1940, the work of 7 centuries was undone in less than 15 minutes. As the Dutch forces held the bridges, the German command ordered a terror bombing to force a surrender. The result was a firestorm that consumed the wooden hearts of the old houses and the ancient records of the warehouses. By the time the smoke cleared, the city of De Vaux and De Hoog was a memory. But the story of Rotterdam did not end in the ashes. What followed was one of the most audacious acts of urban planning in history. The survivors chose not to rebuild the past, they chose to invent the future. Modern Rotterdam, with its glass towers, wide boulevards and straight lines, rose where the memory of the labyrinth once stood. It is a city that turned its trauma into a blank canvas, embracing a radical modernism that looked only forward. We do not look back at old Rotterdam to mourn what was lost, but to understand the spirit that remains. This was a city that never stood still. It was defined by work, by the water, and by the relentless arrival of the tide. The old buildings are gone, but the logic of the city, its grit, its functionality, and its global outlook is still very much alive in the modern docks and the bustling markets of today. As I reflect on this story, the lesson I take for myself is one of resilience through adaptation. Rotterdam reminds us that our identity is not found in the stones of our houses, but in the systems of our lives and the strength of our communities. My advice to you in your daily life is this: do not fear the blank slates in your own journey. When something you have spent years building is lost or changed, remember that you carry the map of your experiences within you. Use that blueprint not to obsessively recreate what is gone, but to build something new, something stronger, and something that faces the future with courage. Before you go, I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder. If your city were to vanish tomorrow, what one ghost or memory of it would you fight to keep alive? Does a city's soul lie in its old buildings or in the movement of its people? If you enjoyed this journey through the vanished streets of Rotterdam, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this story with someone who loves history. Until next time.